There are certain lines you just don't cross. You don't tug on Superman's cape, you don't spit into the wind, and you absolutely, under no circumstances, cut the power to a senior center on movie night. Especially when one of the seniors is my friend Murray, and his oxygen machine doesn't run on good vibes and fond memories. Brenda, the self-appointed guardian of our neighborhood's beige-colored soul, had finally done it. For weeks, she'd been waging a cold war of passive-aggressive notes and glares from behind her perfectly pruned hydrangeas. Now, she'd gone nuclear. She'd weaponized a padlock, cited a bylaw that didn't exist, and declared war on a room full of octogenarians whose greatest crime was enjoying Cary Grant a little too loudly. Her first mistake was thinking she had the authority. Her second mistake was thinking I'd just let it happen. Her third, and most catastrophic mistake, was a complete failure to comprehend that I, Frank Sherman, retired disaster logistics engineer, had a very big hobby sitting in a climate-controlled storage unit just a few miles away. She wanted to play with the light switch. Fine. I was about to bring the sun. My retirement plan was simple. Peace, quiet, and tinkering. Most guys my age get into golf, a sport that seems to be 10% hitting a ball and 90% complaining about their knees. Others get into fishing, which is just a socially acceptable way to drink beer in a boat at 6 a.m. Me? My passion project was a bit more ambitious. I called her the Behemoth. Housed in a 24/7 heavy vehicle storage facility, she was my Sistine Chapel, a gleaming Freightliner semi-truck connected to a 53-foot custom trailer. Inside that trailer wasn't furniture or freight, but a 1.2 megawatt diesel generator, an independent satellite uplink providing gigabit internet, a state-of-the-art climate control system, and most importantly, a commercial-grade coffee machine that could brew 100 cups in under 10 minutes. I'd built her as the ultimate what-if machine. What if a hurricane hit? What if there was a major blackout? What if the zombie apocalypse finally kicked off and I needed to stream it in 4K? The Behemoth was the answer. All I wanted to do now was admire her, polish her chrome fittings, and maybe take her for a spin once a year to keep the systems warm. Is that too much to ask? Apparently it was. The first sign of the coming storm wasn't a thunderclap. It was the soft, determined footfalls of Brenda approaching me as I collected my mail that Tuesday. She carried a clipboard like a scepter. "Mr. Sherman," she began, without any preamble. "We have a situation." I looked at her, then at the peaceful, sun-dappled street. "Do we?" "Your mailbox." She pointed a trembling finger. "It is, according to my measurements, 1.5 inches taller than the height specified in the HOA Community Guidelines, Appendix C, Section 4. I stared at the mailbox. It was a perfectly normal mailbox. It received mail, which I considered its primary function. I could feel the stupid radiating offer in waves, so thick it felt like it was interfering with my Wi-Fi. Appendix C, Section 4, I deadpanned, refers to the maximum height of seasonal lawn ornaments, specifically inflatable snowmen. Unless you're telling me the post office is now employing elves, I think my mailbox is safe. She flushed a deep, satisfying shade of crimson. "The principle is one of aesthetic uniformity, Mr. Sherman, a principle you are clearly flouting." Without another word, I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small Allen key I always carry, and knelt down. I made a great show of fiddling with a screw on the mailbox post, a screw that did absolutely nothing. Then I stood up. "Good now?" I asked. Her brain seemed to short-circuit. She had come prepared for an argument, for a battle of bylaws. She was not prepared for quiet compliance, however fake it might be. I will be monitoring the situation," she stammered, before making a tactical retreat back to her beige fortress. As I watched her go, I knew it wasn't over. People like Brenda don't just let things go, they fester. The Golden Years Senior Center was the heart of the neighborhood, a squat brick building that had been there long before the HOA was a twinkle in some developer's eye. It was a place of simple, unpretentious joy. On Wednesday night, that joy took the form of bingo. I dropped off my weekly contribution, 2 boxes of assorted donut sand, soaked in the scene. The main hall smelled of Bengay, cheap coffee, and pure, unadulterated excitement. The grand prize was a $10 gift card to the Greasy Spoon Diner, but you'd think they were playing for a new car. Carol, the center's manager, was at the front, calling numbers through a crackly microphone. And the next number is B4. Get it? Before you get too excited. A collective, good-natured groan filled the room. She uses that one every week. Gladys, the community's chief information officer, whispered to her table. And every week, Sal laughs like it's the first time he's heard it. Across the table, Murray, a retired electrical engineer with eyes that still held a spark of mischief, was meticulously tracking the called numbers on a sheet of graph paper. The statistical probability of 066 coming up 3 weeks in a row is an anomaly, he declared. It warrants a formal investigation into the integrity of those little white balls. I exchanged a smile with Carol, waved to Murray, and slipped out. As I walked back to my house next door, I glanced across the street. In the darkened window of the immaculate 2-story colonial, I could just make out a silhouette, Brenda, watching, fuming. A dragon guarding a treasure she didn't understand and therefore despised. God help anyone who messes with bingo night, I thought. It was a prayer she was about to answer. The first shot was fired on Thursday morning. It came in the form of a call from a very distressed Carol. Frank, can you please come over? We've received a letter. I found her in her small, cluttered office, holding a single sheet of intimidatingly thick cardstock as if it were radioactive. I took it from her. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate jargon, signed with a flourish by Brenda, HOA president. It has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association, it began, that this facility is responsible for recurring instances of excessive nocturnal illumination, auditory disturbances, and a general non-compliance with established community serenity standards. I had to read that last part twice. Community serenity standards? That sounds like something you'd find in a brochure for a high-end cult. Carol wrung her hands. What does auditory disturbances even mean? Sal tells a few off-color jokes after he wins, but his hearing aid is usually turned off so he can't even hear himself. The letter demanded that all evening activities, namely bingo night and Friday movie night, cease immediately until a community impact assessment could be filed, reviewed, and approved by the board. An approval process, it noted, that could take up to 90 days. I laughed out loud. Carol, this is what bullies do. They use big words on fancy paper to scare you into submission. This building predates the HOA by 30 years. You're almost certainly exempt from their nonsense. She has no authority here. I told her to file it in the most appropriate place, the circular one under her desk. Are you sure? She asked, her voice small. Positive, I said, patting her shoulder. She's a paper tiger, all roar, no claws. That was my mistake. I underestimated her. I treated her like a common crank, a garden-variety nuisance. But a crank with a letterhead, a title, and a bottomless well of misplaced righteousness is something else entirely. She wasn't just barking anymore. This was a declaration of war. And I had just advised our side to unilaterally disarm. Friday night was movie night. Tonight's feature was an affair to remember. The hall was packed, the lights were dim, and the buttery aroma of microwave popcorn filled the air. I had declined an invitation to watch, opting instead for a quiet evening with a book on my own couch. At 8:15 p.m., my quiet evening was interrupted. It wasn't a loud noise, but the opposite. It was the sudden absence of noise. The gentle hum of the senior center's ancient HVAC unit, a sound so constant it was part of the neighborhood's ambient soundtrack, had ceased. I looked out my window. The center was completely dark. My house was fine. The streetlights were on. This wasn't a grid failure. My phone rang. It was Carol, her voice frantic. Frank, the power's out. Just us. I grabbed the heavy maglite I keep by the door and was across the lawn in seconds. Inside, chaos was brewing. Confused murmurs filled the pitch-black room, punctuated by the sharp, rhythmic beeping of a portable oxygen concentrator that had switched to its battery backup, Murray's. That battery was good for maybe an hour, tops. Everyone stay calm, Carol was shouting, her voice strained. I'm sure it's just a fuse. But I knew it wasn't a fuse. I headed straight for the building's exterior utility panel, with Murray, ever the engineer, right on my heels. I flicked on my flashlight, its powerful beam cutting through the darkness. The main circuit breaker panel was housed in a large gray metal box. The heavy door was ajar. Inside, the master breaker, a thick black switch had been thrown to the off position. But that wasn't the worst of it. Clamped over the switch was a heavy-duty, bright red industrial lockout device, the kind we used on oil rigs to prevent accidental electrocutions. It was a serious piece of hardware, designed to be impossible to remove without a key, and threaded through it was a thick padlock. Laminated and attached to the device with a sturdy zip tie was another one of Brenda's official-looking notices. Power disconnected due to continued violations of community bylaws. This utility access point is now under HOA administrative control. Tampering is a finable offense. It was signed, in that same arrogant script, by Brenda. Murray was aghast. "This is insane! It's unbelievably illegal! You can't just cut power to a public access facility. What about the fire alarms, the emergency lighting, my oxygen?" I didn't say anything. I just stared at the lock, the beam of my flashlight tracing its hard, unforgiving lines. The mailbox was petty. The letter was pathetic. This was different. This was a deliberate, calculated act that put vulnerable people at genuine risk. She had crossed a line. And in my world, when someone crosses a line like that, you don't just push them back. You erase the line. You salt the earth where the line used to be. You make them wish they'd never even heard of the concept of lines. I walked back into the darkened hall. The air was already getting thick and stuffy. The glowing screens of cell phones dotted the room like worried fireflies. Murray's oxygen machine kept up its steady, panicked Bipinga metronome, counting down to a real crisis. "It was Brenda," I announced to the room. My voice was cold and flat. "She locked us out of the breaker panel." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Sal, a gruff Korean War veteran who still wore his VFW cap everywhere, started muttering about organizing a flanking maneuver and a citizen's arrest. I looked at the faces in the dim light, worried, confused, and frail. I saw the simple pleasure of their movie night stolen from them. I heard the anxiety in Carol's voice as she tried to reassure everyone. And I felt a cold fury settle deep in my gut. This wasn't going to stand. I pulled out my phone, its screen lighting up my determined face. I walked to a corner of the room for a semblance of privacy and dialed a number I knew by heart, the 24/7 dispatch for the vehicle storage facility. A sleepy voice answered. "All safe heavy storage, Dave speaking." "Dave, it's Frank Sherman. Reservation number 738. "Hey, Frank, you need me to run the monthly systems check on the big girl?" "Negative, Dave," I said, my eyes scanning the darkened room. "Change of plans. I need you to prep the behemoth. Full deployment protocol." There was a pause on the other end. "Full deployment? Seriously? Is this a drill?" "This is not a drill, Dave. I need it delivered to my address. ASAP. Your fastest driver." I glanced over at the sad, empty coffee station. "And Dave, make sure the coffee pot is full when it gets here. We're going to need it." I hung up. That was it. The Rubicon was crossed. The die was cast. The giant, ludicrously overpowered generator was officially on its way. Brenda wanted to play with the light switch. She was about to learn a very important lesson about power. At 9:05 p.m., the ground began to vibrate. It started as a low rumble, the kind you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. It grew steadily, a deep, earth-shaking thrum that rattled the windows in my house. Up and down our quiet suburban street, porch lights flicked on. Heads popped out of doorways, peering into the darkness. Then she appeared. A massive Freightliner semi-truck, its chrome grille and fuel tanks polished to a mirror shine, turned the corner with majestic slowness. Its headlights, clean white LEDs, cut through the night like searchlights, and towed behind it, dwarfing the sedans and minivans parked along the curb, was my masterpiece. The 53-foot trailer was sleek and metallic silver, with no windows, just a series of vents, hatches, and access panels that gave it the ominous look of a mobile cryogenics lab. The driver, a seasoned pro named Gus, maneuvered the entire rig with impossible grace, parallel parking it in the public space, directly in front of the senior center. It took up the length of 3 normal parking spots. With a loud, definitive psh of the air brakes, the behemoth came to a rest. The silence that followed was somehow more profound than the noise that had preceded it. The handful of seniors who had gathered on the lawn stared, mouths agape. Carol, who had come out to see what the commotion was, looked like she'd just witnessed a UFO landing. Murray walked up beside me, his eyes wide. "My God, Frank, what is that?" I allowed myself a small, grim smile. "That, Murray, is what we in the business call overkill. I call it the behemoth." Across the street, I saw a curtain twitch in Brenda's living room window. She probably thought she'd won, sitting in her pristine house, sipping chamomile tea and feeling smug. Oh, you sweet, misguided summer child, I thought. The games have only just begun. I walked over to the trailer and slapped its cool metal side. "Time to go to work, girl." With a twist of a latch, I flipped open a large panel near the front of the trailer. It revealed a control system that would have looked at home on the bridge of a starship. All glowing blue LEDs, digital readouts, and satisfyingly chunky military-grade switches. With the practiced ease of a concert pianist, I initiated the startup sequence. The low, powerful hum that emanated from the trailer was surprisingly quiet, a testament to the thousands of dollars I'd spent on acoustic insulation. Next, I unspooled a thick, bright yellow cable as thick as a python from a motorized reel built into the trailer's undercarriage. Murray, his engineering curiosity now fully ignited, helped me guide it to the center's external power input, a heavy-duty socket normally used by maintenance crews with portable generators. I slotted the massive plug into place with a solid thunk. I returned to my glowing control panel, took a deep breath, and flipped a large, red-capped switch labeled Main Power Distribution. For a second, nothing happened. Then, inside the senior center, the lights flickered once, twice, and then blazed to glorious life. The ancient HVAC unit roared back into action. Through the windows, we could see the movie screen illuminate once again. The panicked beeping from Murray's oxygen machine ceased. A massive, heartfelt cheer erupted from within the building. I flipped a second switch, and they now have a redundant 1 gigabit satellite internet connection. Let's see Brenda try to throttle that. Carol ran out of the center, her face alight with a mixture of joy and disbelief. "Frank, it's working. Everything is working. You're a miracle worker." I took a sip of the fresh, hot coffee I'd just poured from the behemoth's built-in dispenser. "Not a miracle, Carol," I said, watching the steam curl into the night air. "Just proper planning and an obscene amount of diesel fuel." The cheer from the senior center acted like a summoning bell. Drawn by the sudden blaze of light and sound, Brenda stormed out of her front door, a silk robe flapping behind her like the cape of a very angry, very petty supervillain. She stopped dead in her tracks on her perfectly manicured lawn when she saw the behemoth. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. She was, for one beautiful moment, completely speechless. Then she recovered. "What?" she screeched, marching toward me, her slippers slapping on the pavement. "What is the meaning of this? What is that thing?" I leaned calmly against the warm grill of my truck, taking another sip of coffee. "It's a truck and a trailer, Brenda. I'm sure you've seen them before. They carry things. This one carries the ability to make you irrelevant." "This is a flagrant violation," she sputtered, her face turning a blotchy red. "A violation of everything. The noise, the size, the commercial nature of this vehicle." "First," I said, holding up a finger, "it's whisper. Quiet. Second, it's legally parked on a public street, which, as I'm sure a bylaws expert like yourself knows, falls outside of HOA jurisdiction. Third, I'm not conducting commerce. I'm providing emergency humanitarian aid to a community facility you illegally and dangerously cut off from the public grid. I'm fairly certain Good Samaritan laws are on my side here." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't just create your own power. It's against the rules." I gave her my most patient smile. "Show me the rule, Brenda. Point me to the specific bylaw that states I am not allowed to possess, operate, or deploy a mobile command and disaster logistics unit in a residential area. I've read the documents. I'll wait." Watching her mind frantically flip through its internal file of petty regulations was like watching a hamster try to solve a Rubik's Cube. It was never going to happen, but the sheer, earnest effort was almost adorable. Defeated by logic, Brenda resorted to the last refuge of the entitled. "That's it," she shrieked, whipping out her phone. "I'm calling the police. We'll see who's right." 20 minutes later, a squad car rolled up, its flashing lights painting the scene in surreal strobes of red and blue. 2 officers got out. The older one, whose name tag read Miller, had the weary 1,000-yard stare of a man who had seen too many sprinkler disputes. The younger one, Davis, had a distinct glimmer of amusement in his eyes. Brenda immediately unloaded her litany of grievances on them, pointing at the behemoth as if it were a crashed alien spaceship oozing toxic sludge. They listened with the practiced, placid patience of men who were paid by the hour. Finally, Officer Miller turned to me. "Sir, can I see your license and the registration for this vehicle?" "Of course, officer." I walked to the cab of my truck and retrieved a thick 3-ring binder. I opened it on the hood. "Here you are. License, registration for the truck, separate registration for the trailer, insurance, and just in case," I said, flipping to a tab section. "My permit for temporary power generation for charitable purposes. I got it last year, for fun." Officer Davis did a slow walk around the rig, inspecting the parking job. He came back shaking his head. "He's within 18 inches of the curb, not blocking a fire hydrant, and more than 20 feet from the intersection. It's a legal park, ma'am." Miller, meanwhile, had pulled out his phone and was running a decibel meter app. He held it up. "It's humming, but the reading is well below the 55 decibel limit for this time of night. Honestly, it's quieter than your central air conditioner, ma'am." He turned back to Brenda, his face a mask of professional boredom. "Ma'am, as far as I can tell, no laws are being broken here. This appears to be a civil matter for your homeowners association to sort out. Please don't call 911 again unless a crime is actually being committed." But look at it," Brenda pleaded, gesturing wildly. As they walked back to their car, I heard Davis mutter to Miller, "You got to admit, it's impressive." Miller just sighed. "The paperwork, Davis. Think of the paperwork if we had to impound that thing." I closed my binder. The ultimate weapon. Cops love binders. It shows you're not a crackpot. You're an organized crackpot, and there's a world of difference between the two. The next morning, I was on my porch, sipping coffee and monitoring the behemoth's fuel consumption on a tablet. The generator was a magnificent beast, but she was thirsty. This wasn't a sustainable long-term solution. It was tactical. Now I needed a strategy. I looked up best commercial electricians in the area. At the top of the list, with dozens of 5-star reviews praising their no-nonsense attitude, was Sparky's Electrical Solutions. I dialed the number. A gruff but friendly voice answered on the second ring. "Sparky's, you got a problem. We got a solution." "Hello," I began, in my most understated tone. "My name is Frank Sherman. I have a minor power access issue at a community building. An unauthorized administrative lockout has been placed on the main breaker. I'm currently running the facility off a temporary generator, and I'd like a professional opinion on the feasibility of restoring grid power." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then a low chuckle. "Hold on, let me get this straight. You're calling me because your HOA lady put a padlock on the main power feed to a senior center?" "That is an accurate summary of the situation, yes." "And what kind of temporary generator are we talking about here?" "A 1.2 megawatt mobile command and logistics unit," I said, as casually as if I were describing a toaster. "It's a personal project." Another pause, longer this time, followed by a hearty laugh. "A 1.2? You're kidding me." "Listen, I had a panel upgrade scheduled for this afternoon, but it just got postponed. Indefinitely. I'm canceling it. I gotta see this. I'll be there in an hour." Sure enough, Brenda's next move came via paper. I found another official HOA letter taped to my front door at lunchtime. This one was shorter, citing a bylaw, a real one this time, against parking commercial or industrial vehicles on a residential street for more than 24 consecutive hours. My time was almost up. A slow grin spread across my face. She'd left me a loophole the size of a freightliner. I walked over to the senior center, where Gladys was holding court by the coffee machine. I explained the situation and my proposed solution. Her eyes lit up with the fire of a born co-conspirator. She immediately got on the phone with her grandson, who worked at a print shop. An hour later, I was the proud owner of 2 large, professionally printed magnetic signs. I walked out to the street and, with a satisfying thwump, slapped them onto the sides of the behemoth's trailer. They read, Golden Years Senior Center, Official Mobile Activities, Wellness Annex. I took a photo with my phone and emailed it to the HOA's general inbox. The subject line was, Vehicle Clarification. The body of the email simply said, Please note that this is an accessory vehicle for the community center, used for their ongoing health and wellness programs. It is not a commercial vehicle. Thank you for your understanding. Checkmate. It wasn't my truck anymore. It was their annex. If Brenda wanted it towed now, she'd have to go through Carol and argue that the senior center wasn't allowed to have its own wellness annex. It was a public relations battle she was guaranteed to lose. And she knew it. I watched from my window as she read the sign from her porch, her face tightening into a furious little knot. A short while later, a clean white van with Sparky's Electrical Solutions emblazoned on the side pulled up. A man with a tool belt slung low on his hips and a genuinely amused expression hopped out. He took one long, appreciative look at the behemoth, let out a low whistle and shook his head. Okay, he said, walking over to me. You were not kidding, Sparky. He held out a calloused hand. Frank, I said, shaking it. I led him and a very eager Murray over to the scene of the crime, the locked utility box. Sparky took one look at the red lockout device and the padlock. Whoa. She did not mess around, he said, impressed despite himself. That's a Croy. Bauer 7000 series. High security. They use these on electrical substations. You ain't getting through that with a pair of bolt cutters from the hardware store. He examined the casing, the wiring, the entire setup. Legally, he said, stepping back. My hands are tied. That lock is HOA property, on a box attached to their building. If I cut it, that's destruction of property. They could sue my business into the ground. He crossed his arms. So, your options are, 1. You try to reason with the crazy lady, which, forgive me for saying so, seems unlikely. 2. You get a court order to have it removed, which could take weeks. Or 3, he grinned, gesturing to my rig, you keep enjoying the show. Personally, my money's on the show. I have never, in 25 years of being an electrician, seen anything like this. There's always a 4th option, Sparky, I said, staring at the lock. We just haven't found it yet. Brenda, thwarted by my wellness annex gambit, resorted to a campaign of microaggressions. Notes appeared on the behemoth's windshield, complaining about its negative aesthetic impact and its disruption of the neighborhood's visual harmony. On Sunday morning, during a donut-fueled strategy session in the now brightly lit and pleasantly cool senior center, I read her latest missive aloud. If she wants an aesthetic impact, I declared, crumbling the note in my fist, then by God, let's give her one. Gladys's eyes twinkled. My grandson, Leo, she said conspiratorially. He's in art school at the community college. Very modern. He's always looking for things to put in his portfolio. An hour later, Leo, a lanky kid with paint-splattered jeans and a nervous energy, was standing on the street, staring up at the vast silver canvas that was the side of my trailer. I'd offered him a generous commission. The theme, as decided by the Senior Center Activities Committee, ad hoc, was Golden Years, Golden Power. Leo set up his scaffolding and got to work, fueled by a steady stream of iced tea and encouragement from a rotating gallery of seniors who had set up lawn chairs to watch. Over the next few hours, a masterpiece of malicious compliance began to take shape on the side of the trailer facing Brenda's house. It was glorious. He painted heroic, muscular-looking seniors engaged in epic activities. There was Sal, depicted like a Revolutionary War hero, holding a bingo dabber like a rifle. There was a group of women engaged in what could only be described as competitive extreme knitting, their needles flashing like swords. Best of all, there was Murray, wrestling a giant yellow electrical cable as if it were a mythological sea serpent. The pièce de résistance, however, was in the bottom right corner. There, rendered in comically tiny detail, was a figure that looked suspiciously like Brenda, dressed as a grumpy garden gnome, being shooed away by a brilliant sunbeam emanating from the senior center. I watched Brenda watch the entire process from her living room window, her silhouette rigid with incandescent rage. "It's the most beautiful, most passive-aggressive thing I've ever seen," I told Murray, who was beaming with pride at his depiction. "It's the Sistine Chapel of Spite. Leo's getting a very, very generous scholarship contribution for this." Brenda's retaliation came Monday morning. Having failed on the legal and aesthetic fronts, she decided to try science. Or her version of it. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the porch when she marched onto her lawn, brandishing a professional-grade digital decibel meter. She pointed it at the behemoth like a ghostbuster scanning for paranormal activity, squinted at the reading, and made a triumphant call. Officers Miller and Davis arrived looking even more existentially tired than they had on their last visit. Miller's sigh was so heavy I think it momentarily altered the barometric pressure on my porch. "It's peaking at 60 decibels, Brenda announced, presenting her evidence. "That is a clear violation of Municipal Code 9.4530, which stipulates a maximum of 55 decibels during daytime hours." I beckoned Officer Miller over. "Feel free to take your own reading, officer. Right next to the source." Miller pulled out his phone, opened the same app he'd used before, and held it near the trailer. The needle on the digital display hovered, then settled. 48 dB, ma'am," he said, showing her the screen. "That's well within the legal limit." Brenda stared at my trailer, then at her meter, then back at the trailer. "But my reading? It was 60. I saw it." I pointed to a series of new, sleek, gray panels that were now affixed around the generator's main housing and exhaust port, panels that hadn't been there yesterday. "Installed them last night," I said cheerfully. "Custom acoustic dampening panels, military-grade foam composites. Cost a small fortune, but the peace and quiet in the neighborhood is worth it, don't you think?" Officer Miller fixed Brenda with a look of profound weariness. "Ma'am, his generator is now officially quieter than my partner's snoring. You have become my most frequent contact. More than my wife. More than dispatch. For the good of my sanity, I need that to change." He closed his notebook with a snap. "Consider this an official warning for misuse of police resources. Have a serene day." As they left, I saw Davis trying, and failing, to hide a grin. I leaned back in my chair. Anticipate, insulate, annihilate. The three pillars of dealing with petty tyrants. She'd brought a decibel meter to a technology fight. It was a tactical error of epic proportions. Humiliated in front of the law, Brenda fell back on the one weapon she thought she still controlled, the HOA itself. She called an emergency HOA meeting for Tuesday night at the community clubhouse. Her stated agenda was to get a formal vote authorizing the board to retain legal counsel and seek an injunction to have the behemoth forcibly removed. She came prepared. She had a PowerPoint presentation filled with grainy telephoto pictures of my truck, highlighted sections of the bylaws, and dire, unsubstantiated warnings about plunging property values. She delivered it with the grim certainty of a general laying out a battle plan. Then she made a fatal mistake. She opened the floor for discussion, expecting a chorus of support. She didn't get one. She failed to account for Gladys. Over the past few days, Gladys and her network of tech-savvy grandkids had been waging a brilliant information campaign on the neighborhood's private Facebook group. The story of Hero Frank versus the granny-hating Oa Prez had become local legend. They'd posted photos of the smiling seniors, the triumphant mural, and testimonials from residents praising the newfound sense of community. Mr. Henderson from 2 doors down was the first to stand up. "Brenda, with all due respect," he began, "that mural has brought more character and joy to this street in 3 days than your beige paint mandates have in 10 years. A woman from the next block stood up. "I'd like to ask why you, Brenda, felt you had the authority to cut the power to a building full of 80-year-olds in the first place. My mother was in there. What if her pacemaker had an issue?" The room erupted. The meeting she had called to crucify me swiftly devolved into her own public pillorying. The vote, when it finally happened, wasn't even close. Her motion was defeated so overwhelmingly that it was almost comical. She stood at the podium, speechless and pale, as her power base crumbled to dust around her. Defeated, humiliated, and stripped of her authority, Brenda made one last, desperate move. She went outside the law. At 2:15 a.m. on Wednesday, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't a call or a text. It was a motion alert from the behemoth's port-side security camera. I sat up in bed and tapped the notification. The live feed filled my screen. A rusty, unmarked tow truck, the kind with more grit than paint, was backing up to the front of my rig. Its lights were off. A figure dressed in dark clothes hopped out and began fiddling with a heavy-duty hook and chain, preparing to attach it to my front axle. My eyes narrowed. This was it. The final gambit. I took a deep breath, and on the custom control app on my tablet, I pressed the large, red, unmistakable icon labeled Protocol Omega. On the silent, sleeping street, all hell broke loose. First, with a powerful hydraulic hiss, 4 massive leveling jacks slammed down from the behemoth's chassis, lifting the 10-ton trailer 6 inches off the ground and anchoring it to the solid asphalt with immovable force. Second, a deafeningly loud train horn, salvaged from a retired locomotive and mounted on the roof of my truck's cab, let out a blast that didn't just break the silence. It shattered it into a million pieces. Third, a battery of 8 military-grade LED floodlights, each one capable of putting out 150 zero-lumens ignited simultaneously. The entire street was bathed in light, so intense it was like a second sun had risen. The would-be tow truck driver, caught in the sound and fury, froze like a deer in the world's brightest headlights. He dropped the heavy chain with a clang, scrambled back into his cab in a blind panic, and peeled out, leaving a strip of smoking rubber and the faint smell of terror in his wake. Lights flicked on in every house up and down the block. The entire event, from the truck's arrival to its frantic departure, had lasted less than 30 seconds. And it was all perfectly captured in crystal-clear high definition from 4 different camera angles. I leaned back against my pillows. Protocol Omega is generally reserved for things like bear attacks, zombie hordes, or exceptionally stupid tow truck drivers. I probably should have programmed in a strobe effect, I thought, maybe for the next upgrade. This time, I didn't call 911. I called the sharp, no-nonsense lawyer I'd put on retainer the day after the power was cut. I sent her the video file with a simple message. I believe this constitutes crossing a line. Her name was Ms. Chen, and she arrived at 9 a.m., sharp, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than my first car. She was followed shortly by a police car. It wasn't Miller and Davis. This time they'd sent a sergeant, a man with a jaw like a block of granite and an expression that suggested he had absolutely no time for any of this. They convened on the sidewalk in front of Brenda's house. Ms. Chen, calm and precise, informed the sergeant that she was there to file for an emergency restraining order against Ms. Chen. Brenda Albright on behalf of her client, Mr. Frank Sherman, and the Golden Years Senior Center, citing a clear pattern of escalating harassment which had culminated in an attempted illegal seizure of private property in the middle of the night. Then she showed him the video on her tablet. The sergeant watched the 30-second clip without blinking. His granite jaw seemed to get even tighter. He walked over to Brenda, who was pretending to trim her rose bushes with a pair of tiny scissors, as if it were just another Wednesday morning. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice low and firm, "your little neighborhood dispute is now an active criminal investigation. I am serving you with this temporary restraining order, which forbids you from contacting Mr. Sherman or coming within 100 feet of that vehicle. I strongly advise you to contact an attorney, and then stop talking, immediately." Brenda's face went white. She dropped the scissors into her perfect petunias. The war was over. She had lost. While Brenda was dealing with her new legal reality, I called Sparky. I explained the night's events and the restraining order. There was a moment of silence on the line, then Sparky let out a laugh. "Frank, you are my hero. But this gives me an idea. She can't fight you anymore. But she also can't fight the power company." He had a stroke of pure, blue-collar genius. He told me his plan, and I gave him my enthusiastic blessing. Sparky drafted a professional, urgent email to his regional contact at the electric utility, not to the customer service inbox, but to the head of field operations. He laid out the situation not as a petty HOA squabble, but as a critical public safety and utility integrity issue. He described an unstable third party who was illegally tampering with their infrastructure, creating a public hazard and obstructing access to their equipment. He attached the police report number, the video of the tow truck fiasco as evidence of the individual's erratic behavior, and a freshly signed petition from over 50 residents organized by Gladys in a matter of hours demanding action. The effect was immediate. On Thursday morning, 2 official utility company trucks, not contractors, but the real deal, rolled onto our street. The crew chief, a big man with a bigger pair of bolt cutters, walked right up to me. "We saw your friend Sparky's email," he said, shaking his head. "Corporate is not pleased. This sort of thing gives us a bad name and a huge liability headache." He walked over to the utility box. He didn't bother inspecting Brenda's high-security lock. He simply opened his giant bolt cutters and, with one satisfying final snap, severed the thick steel shackle. The lock fell to the ground with a pathetic clink. His team swarmed the box, inspected the connections, and re-engaged the main breaker. The crew chief then taped a new official notice over the panel. It stated that the equipment was the sole property of the utility company and that any unauthorized access would be met with federal prosecution. He looked at Brenda's house, then back at me with a grin. "We'll be sending the HOA the bill for the emergency call-out fee and the replacement of the damaged, unauthorized hardware." To celebrate, I decided the behemoth deserved one last hurrah. That Saturday, with a proper permit from the city, we closed off the end of the street for a neighborhood-wide "We Got the Power Back" barbecue. My beautiful, absurd machine powered it all. The bouncy castle I rented for the grandkids, the amplifiers for the surprisingly good classic rock cover band I hired, and a snow cone machine that was an instant hit with everyone from age 6 to 86. Sparky and his crew were the guests of honor, drinking beer and telling the story of the Croy Bauer 7000 to anyone who would listen. The seniors presented me with a giant, gaudy trophy they'd made. It featured a gold-painted model of a generator on top, and the plaque read, "To Frank, our power broker." Across the street, a real estate agent was hammering a "for sale" sign into Brenda's immaculate lawn. The next morning, in the quiet Sunday dawn, I went out to my rig. The party was over, the street was clean, the mission was accomplished. I went through the shutdown sequence, the controls on the panel going dark one by one. The low, powerful hum I had grown so accustomed to ceased, and the silence felt both peaceful and a little bit sad. I retracted the hydraulic jacks, reeled in the last of the cables, and closed up the panels. With a final, fond glance at the senior center, I climbed into the cab of my truck. I started the engine, and slowly, carefully, drove the behemoth down the street and out of the neighborhood, back to her quiet life in storage, and back to mine. A week later, I was sitting on my porch, reading a book. The quiet I had craved for so long had returned. It was peaceful. It was serene. And if I was being honest with myself, it was just a little bit boring. I saw 3 figures coming up my walkway: Carol, Murray, and Gladys, carrying a cake. "We don't want to disturb your peace," Carol said, smiling. "We just wanted to thank you one last time," said Gladys. "And to inform you of a motion that passed unanimously at the last center board meeting," Murray added, his eyes twinkling. Carol told me that the HOA, now under new, saner management, had issued a formal apology and had permanently dissolved the Community Serenity Committee. Then Gladys held up her phone. It showed a picture of a newly installed, very official-looking brass plaque on the wall of the center's main hall. It read, "The Frank Sherman Power Station." I let out a loud groan and buried my face in my hands. "Oh, for crying out loud. You can't be serious. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Carol said softly. "The lights are on, Frank. The bingo balls are rolling. The coffee is brewing. Thanks to you. We don't think that's ridiculous at all." I grumbled and complained, but I accepted a slice of cake. Later that evening, I sat on my porch, watching the warm lights of the senior center spill out onto the lawn, the Frank Sherman Power Station. It sounded exhausting. It sounded like a responsibility. But as I sat there in the quiet, I had to admit, it had a certain ring to it. Maybe this whole peaceful retirement thing was overrated anyway. I pulled out my tablet and started sketching. I wondered if the behemoth satellite dish could be upgraded to track deep space telemetry. Now that would be a fun little project.